Hey folks, it's Patriot Nurse. Thanks for joining me today in this video. We're going to discuss what they are planning in 2024 and how we can best prepare ourselves for it. So there was actually a trailer released of a film that's scheduled to be released in the spring of 2024. And the purpose essentially of this video is to communicate the hypothetical reality of what a United States in chaos around election time, what a United States in chaos and a next civil war would look like. Now, for those of you who've been following this channel for any amount of time, you will know that I have spoken about this for over a decade. And it's not because I wish it to be so. If you are a student of history, as I am, you know that these things occur in cycles. And really, the United States has been on a trajectory of quote-unquote civil war since its inception. And the disagreements, of course, between the founding fathers, particularly the writings of the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, you see that this has been coming for some time. But how this is looking to come together, really we should pay attention to. If you have been noting the relative quiet of leftist groups and domestic terrorist groups like Black Lives Matter up until recently, you know that their antics, whether it was rioting and burning things down and looting and pillaging and inflicting violence on people and stopping traffic, lining up on roads and essentially causing harm to people, they've been quiet for a while. But they've recently woken up, and they've woken up incrementally to essentially get you reacclimated to their new norm of violence, where they are setting the tempo. And where they have chosen to manifest this most recently is in the whole pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protests. Interestingly enough, Hamas, just this past week, made a public proclamation calling for violence against Americans at every turn. So the people who are supporting Hamas here in the United States, they're also supporting their own destruction and the destruction of the American citizenry. But more to the point, just because you've moved to a red state or you think about moving to a red state, you are not going to escape this people. And let me give you a classic example of this with what happened recently in my home state of Tennessee in the city of Knoxville. So we have in East Tennessee a long history of freedom, but we've been recently infected by groups of people, whether moving here with their toxic ideology or importing people here from toxic places with immigrant and refugee programs who are espousing Marxist ideology and ultimately Islamo-fascist ideology. And so we had a council member by the name of Parker on the Knoxville City Council bring up for a resolution that the city of Knoxville would adopt resolutions straight along the lines of Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in support of the terrorist elements that perpetrated October 7th. Now, the fascinating thing is not necessarily the fact that you would have some woke founding member of Black Lives Matter in Knoxville be the person who sponsored this. What was interesting was the dossier of characters that came in support of this measure, which ultimately failed, and failed miserably, of course, because for the most part, people in Knoxville have their heads screwed on straight, and definitely in East Tennessee. But here's the thing. The people who showed up in support of this were your local deceived leftist, your imported terrorist element that started out with Black Lives Matter, and in general, people who are in support of Islamofascism. These are the people who came in support of this measure, who spoke at the council meeting in Knoxville. And the way that they had their social discourse was right out of the page of exactly what Winston Churchill warned about, which was they and they alone were allowed to speak. And anybody else who had their speaking term, whether it was a rabbi or whether it was a member of the community, they were roundly shouted down, they were aggressively yelled at, and they were postured against by these people who have a strong overlap with Black Lives Matter. Why does this matter for 2024? Because I want you to understand, all of this that's starting out right now, that has seemingly got nothing to do with America, has everything to do with America. Because the same people who have these overlaps in these communities, whether it's Black Lives Matter and the pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas protests, the people who lined up on the LA freeway this past week and blocked traffic, these are the same types of methodologies that have been used by every Marxist insurgency to take down a liberal and free democratic country in history. Why is this? Sir Winston Churchill said it best. For them, democracy is a tool to be used and afterwards broken. The way that they get their way, the way that insurgent Marxist elements And make no mistake, there is a hefty crossover between Black Lives Matter and the destructive, fascistic elements of Black Lives Matter, which ultimately, when you think about, like, fascism and Marxism have essentially a paper-thin veil between the two of them. When you get too far ends of the extreme, it's like a circle end up coming back on itself. But they've learned their tactics. They've gotten their tactics from Marxist insurgencies. They have utilized them successfully throughout the rest of the world. And they are utilizing them currently in the United States, and even places like Knoxville, in a supposedly red state, but have been invaded. These red states that have been invaded, you're not going to be safe in them. So what does this look like going forward into the future? I expect in 2024 that there is going to be an increase and a ramping up in the rhetoric of the previously quiet Black Lives Matter type. Really, essentially, these are serial agitators. They are domestic terrorist elements. They know exactly how to utilize the Constitution in order to break it. That's what they do. And the interesting thing is that once you have these type of people get a vocal minority, they have a way of shouting down the majority because the majority's own conscience holds them captive with their moral governance on their own behavior. So they know exactly which buttons to push in order to get their way through, wherein ultimately they get to a place of power and then they crush their opposition. So for 2024, with the elections coming up, if you have paid attention to the goings on in Washington and also probably in your local politics, the left is gearing up. They are gearing up to do more of the same, to probably instigate more things, more events that will show up in the form of riots or protests, mostly peaceful protests. They're going to do it. And when they do it, we need to be ready for it. And so part of being ready for this is not only watching your six, so to speak, but being willing to do the diligence on your part ahead of time. I've released several shorts over the past couple of weeks, kind of recounting some of my best tips for being prepared from a defensive standpoint, whether it's getting your rifle set up or dry practice, things that you can do at the range, things that you can do at home that doesn't require you spending ammo and that doesn't require you even really leaving your home. You need to be able to defend yourself against these people because when it comes right down to it, the left in the United States is championing the actions of a death cult, Islamic fanatic group that slaughtered more Jews in one day than any event since the Holocaust. They are championing these people. And if you think for 1 second that they're going to exercise some type of restraint just because you happen to be a neighbor, you got another thing coming. We need to be prepared to defend ourselves against these types of people, because when radical elements get in to the degree that they are right now, they tend to stoke fires and they tend to give permission to people who are otherwise cowards to act of their own volition. The next point that I think it's necessary to really touch on is financial security. I'm not giving financial advice per se. I'm not a financial analyst or a financial advisor, but I think it's prudent to be diversified in any way, shape, or form that you can. Some people would say this is in like grid money, this is in cash, this is in precious metals, in cryptocurrencies, in non-precious metals like lead. Things like this will allow you to really shield yourself against sudden fluctuations in currency valuation. What we've seen recently with Argentina, I think that really testifies to the desperation of people, and also seeing the peso effectively devalued 50% in one day as a measure to bring their country back from the crazy level of inflation that they've seen. We could see something like that here. I don't know to what degree that could be, but I plan on it being a possibility for sure. The housing situation is insane. People are not housing secure, and they're not living quarters secure. Part of the reason for this, and why I ultimately think you're going to end up seeing riots coming up in 2024, we've let so many people come across the border here. There is only a finite amount of housing available, and illegal immigrants and also people who have been brought here from countries that have nothing whatsoever in common with the Enlightenment, they are out competing American citizens for housing. And because of that, our housing costs are going up. People are having a harder and harder time paying their bills. It is, I think, approximately 25 to 30% more expensive just to buy any sort of housing, whether renting or otherwise, than it was 3 years ago. That's not going to get fixed anytime soon. So you're going to see more trouble over this economically. The next point here is with healthcare. The average cost, the last time I checked, of healthcare expenditure for just insurance in the lifespan of a person from 25 up until about retirement age is almost $1 million, about 900,000 last time I checked. There was an article I was looking at that essentially evaluated the crazy cost of the American dream. It has been because of inflation, not because of excess necessarily, but because of inflation, because our dollar is worth less and less. It is becoming more and more difficult for people to eke out a meager existence, and what would have been considered previously a middle-class standard of living is now considered upper class, and people are being driven into impoverishment effectively because our government, the Biden administration, and all the lefties up there, as well as some Republicans who just don't seem to be able to manage their freaking pocketbooks, they are more than happy to print more dollars and give it away for people who don't belong here. That's not going to stop. And the border, unless it is closed, is going to continue ushering people in here who are, number one, entitled, two, potentially violent, three, potentially sleeper cell terrorist elements. And that is something we can look forward to in 2024. So the economic situation is going to play hand in glove, I think, into the overall domestic risk for upheaval and for breakdown in rule of law. And of course, the healthcare issue. Healthcare is getting crazy expensive for people, and at the bare minimum we have to be able to unhook from needing that grid. And so the way I think that we move forward into this is exactly what I've been telling people for over a decade now: beans, bullets, and band-aids. We have to be able to secure ourselves, not only from a physical security standpoint, but from a financial standpoint. Food security is huge, whether it's having a couple of months worth of food stored up or in a homestead way, trying to prepare and cultivate and produce more of your own food. You can totally go towards that, but you got to be able to take care of people's needs at home. I find it very, very interesting that one of the buzz stories right now in the media is bemoaning the plight of the poor Palestinians in Gaza, who overwhelmingly support the genocidal and terrorist organization Hamas, and how now that they're all together in refugee camps and drinking water that's contaminated with their own crap, now people are getting sick. This is what happens when breakdown in rule of law. This is what happens when your previously assumed standard of norm goes into the toilet. No pun intended. People get sick. You need to know how to deal with this. If we end up facing the potential consequences which have been a can kicked for decades in this country, if we end up having these chickens come home to roost in 2024, you can expect to see a need for healthcare that is not on the grid, a need for alternative support, and we have to have ways to do that. So friends, the beans, bullets, and band-aids are relevant now. They've always been relevant. History is replete with examples of this. The best predictor of the future is the past. Hope the video was helpful for you. Make sure, guys, make sure. My upcoming class, the upcoming herbal preparedness class, we are debuting that, Lord willing, on January 1st of 2024. They're coming at us with their architected chaos, and I'm going to be doing my best to bring you guys opportunity to learn and to structure yourself in a way so that way you need these people less and you need their grid less. So if you want first contact when that becomes available, you can sign up on our link here to be notified when the class goes live and when it's available for purchase. It's going to be longer. This is over double the length of my first class, and it is focused on herbal preparedness when there is no grid, when there is no pharmaceutical available, and when you have a breakdown in the previously assumed standards of care that we have come to expect in the West. When all those structures crumble, you got to have a backup, and that's what I have attempted to bring you in this course, the herbal preparedness course. So friends, make sure that you sign up for that. You can also check it out at the website, thepatriotnurse.com, and be notified there first. I hope the video was helpful for y'all. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. Make sure you click that bell button too. YouTube's playing some screwy algorithm games with me, so make sure if you want to stay in the loop that you are dialed in that way. Friends, I hope the video was helpful for you. I hope you have a very blessed weekend. For now, it's Patriot Nurse signing off, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.